I want to tell you a little bit of story about why I do two things right now, why I'm the internal learning manager at some giant company, and why I also run my own company. And I'm going to talk to you about it through knitting. And I really like knitting a lot. As you can tell, I like wearing other people's knitting, and I like knitting my own stuff. But the problem about that is I like beginning stuff a lot more than I like ending stuff. This is a real live picture of what's in my house right now. There are like 10 others of these books that have never been opened. I saw them at the library, and I think they're awesome. And I'm going to get to them eventually, someday. The thing about this, as other knitting people know, we got knitters in the house, anybody? All right, good. It's like all concentrated right there. To get the value out of what you knit, you have to stop it. You have to end it. You have to be like, I'm done. I'm going to go for it. I'm done. I'm going to stop. And I'm not very good at that. That changed about a year and a half ago. I incorporated a business that I knew I was going to commit to, and I was going to finish that. The problem was that I didn't quite know what finished meant, right? Was I going to do this business for a little while or for a long while? And the thing about that is that I realized I had a lot of stuff going on. And has ever anybody knitted two colors into one thing? You're not supposed to knit the same color into a different row like this. It's really tacky. But that's how I do it. I really like it that way. So that's what's happening in my life, and it's been happening for my entire life, and it makes me seem schizophrenic. And most of my friends are like, "Are you going to settle down sometime? Are you going to like pick a career? Do one thing at one time?" And I realized that I'm just knitting in multiple colors into the same scarf, multiple pieces of yarn, different ideas. How can you be a learning designer and an organizational strategist at the same time when you're supposed to be just one consultant of one type of thing that one company hires you for? And it's really boring like that, and so I don't do it like that. And so what I realized when I started my business in early 2014 and into 2015 was that I started knitting in a bunch of different ideas. And it was just a baby business. It was just a fledgling business. And it was really kind of crazy. It looked like that board in the background. And then when I looked down, it looked like a yarn stash that was like your crap yarn that you don't use because it's ugly. But you were like, oh, this is going to be great when you bought it. And you never use it ever again because you don't want to wear it because it's ugly. That's what my business looked like. And so I was really lucky enough to have some really great mentors who were like, what the F are you doing? Like, do you even know what you're doing? Do you know how to run a business? And I was like, some people pay me some money for this, okay? They're paying me some money. They're like, they're not paying you nearly what it's worth to do what you're doing, and you need to stop. And so I ripped out like 90% of that shit, and I just started knitting again. I started knitting all over again, and I could finally start to see a real piece of fabric knit up. Isn't that the coolest thing about knitting, is that there's a fucking piece of fabric? It's so cool. I think that's awesome. That it's like it was yarn, and now it's fabric. And some cool things started happening that I could physically see with my business. I mean, I was changing my logo. I was changing these words. I used to be using the term education design. Raise your hand if you even think you know what that means. It's like Ben Carmel's going to raise his hand, but that's about it. That doesn't mean anything to anybody, so I dropped it. And I started knitting again, and I could finally see something working again for me. And people were doing the same for me. They were saying, that's working, I'm going to pay you for that. It makes sense to me. It's becoming a real business, and that's what happened when the pieces were getting put together and people started noticing, and somebody reached out to me. I had a couple of clients that were kind of my main clients, paying me a good bit of money, actually more money than I ever made at a job, which is why you shouldn't have jobs, you should have businesses. And they asked me to stop what I was doing. And they said, here's something else shinier and more interesting, and I think you should come do that. And I realized, does this mean I have to end my business? This is something that's also really interesting to me, but I don't want to end my business. I don't want to stop. And so I went back to the drawing board, and I ripped stuff up again, and I figured out, how do I do the thing that I love and be true to myself and to the business that I created, this little fledgling baby, and do the right thing, do something good for the people of a company that needed it. And I went back to knitting. It was like being in a yarn store where there's a million pieces of yarn, these skeins of yarn that are just lovely and gorgeous, and they cost like $40 a piece. But that's what this opportunity gave me. Gave me the really expensive yarn to play with that you don't get to play with on your own time. And what I realized during that time was that this was giving me a chance to think about beginnings and endings, and not all endings are actually finishings, right? They get woven in, and I get to weave them in when I want to weave them in, and I get to choose how I weave them in and with what new colors. And so I started this new project. I put something on pause. I put my baby on pause. And I said, I'll come back. I'm making a plan for you. And you're going to be this color of yarn over here. And I'm going to knit in you a little bit later. And hang out there for a year, and I'll be back. And what I found during this project is that there's a lot of other colorful yarn out there that you should get to play with. And you should learn how to knit in multiple things in your life without saying, I'm done with that forever. It doesn't have to end like that. Thank you very much.